Peace takes inspiration from platformers of the past like Super Meat Boy and Bit Trip Runner to create a dark humor narrative around the concept of raging in video games. While its formula is familiar and oftentimes repetitive, its narrative helps it stand out among the rest, if just ever so slightly. Rage in Peace stars Timmy, a 27-year-old deathformer who comes across the Grim Reaper on his way to work. The Grim Reaper tells Timmy that he'll die by the end of the day by getting his head cut off. The actual news of death doesn't scare Timmy at all. However, he does have a preference on how he wants to die. If it was his choice, he'd rather die peacefully in bed with his pajamas. With the Grim Reaper not having said how, when, or where Timmy would die, Timmy is determined to live his dream death through. His journey to his literal deathbed is no easy task though. It's covered by death traps at every single corner just trying to stop him. While the narrative has some dark humor ingrained into it, it's ultimately a tale of finding inner peace. It plays with the game's mechanic of constant death and respawn to tell a bigger message than what the premise of the game would lead you to believe. Timmy is a numb sad sack that's oddly enough a charming and relatable little character through his conversations with death. With so little to literally live for, you can't help but root for him on his one last mission. The trip to Timmy's deathbed is a 6-act journey that will take you just a handful of hours depending on your skills and patience. Certainly it's a game that can be beaten in a single afternoon. Each act of the story takes you through a new terrain that vastly differs from the previous. From the offices of Timmy's work to the deserts that for some reason are on Timmy's way home, there's no lack of hazards trying to stop you. Wrecking balls falling from the sky, ghosts coming out of computers, and sharks jumping out of puddles are just some of the absurd threats you'll run into. Levels are structured in a linear fashion, often going down straight hallways or up and down platforms towards your next terrain. With Timmy only being able to run and jump, it's really up to the levels to add diversity to the gameplay to keep things feeling fresh. A lot of the level's variety comes from the different types of enemies and environments. While the environments do actually change up the look and sometimes the feeling of levels, hazards really don't. At the end of the day, a brick wall falling on top of me is no different than a stone edge head falling on top of me. There's a lot of easily replaceable hazards like that here, and they feel a bit lazy. In the office, I'm avoiding spiked wrecking balls, while in the desert world, I'm dodging mummified spiked wrecking balls. It's lacking in creativity to say the least. Playing through levels is a sequence of constant trial and error. Death obstacles are hidden everywhere, and as soon as you overcome one, you'll be greeted with another. It ends up making the gameplay a game of memorization rather than platforming skill. Of course you'll need patience to finish the levels, but luckily there are checkpoints that are scattered pretty forgivingly. I personally tend not to be the gamer with the most patience, but even with the genre of this title, I had no problem finishing it in a single afternoon. There's actually an even easier mode that gives you more frequent checkpoints if you end up having a tough time with the original mode. For achievement hunters and people looking for replay value, there are collectible items scattered throughout levels. They're not so tough to actually find, but rather they're put near hazards, sometimes making them hard to grab without dying in the process. No worries though, you'll be dying a lot in this game as there's a permanent reminder at the corner of the screen. In an odd twist of things, it plays to the whole story of death acceptance that the story is about. The best part of levels were the boss fights at the end of acts. While your moveset for Timmy doesn't change, the boss fights change the structure of the levels and make them feel a bit more unique from the rest of the game. For example, an early boss fight will have you facing someone that mimics your every movement. These fights were still pretty simple, but offered a breath of fresh air to the structure of things. Where the gameplay is a bit repetitive, the visuals on the other hand are a much better turnout. Rage in Peace is presented in a hand-drawn art style that resembles the looks of games like Castle Crashers and Battle Block Theater. It almost looks like a long-lost Newgrounds animation of the past. I appreciated the little atmospheric touches to the animation, like the specks of sand floating in the desert level, or just Timmy's idle animation actually having some animation to it. Playing in either dock or handheld mode on the Switch, the scale of the gameplay adapted well to both screen sizes. Although because of the nature of the gameplay, I often found myself playing on the go more often than I did on the TV. The music in Rage in Peace was pretty forgettable. Songs only really came up during pause screens and in boss fights. Occasionally they'd come into play during dialogue sequences, but they never really stood out. Perhaps it was the design of the levels constantly killing me over and over again that sort of drowned out the noise. The use of sound effects on the other hand was pretty well done. Every little element of the stage got some sort of inclusion. The office, for example, was a chaotic symphony of alarms going off, lights flashing, puddles dripping, and so much more. Even if you didn't have your eyes open, you knew what was going on in the room because of the attention to detail in the sound design. Rage in Peace is a rage-inducing platformer with a surprisingly meaningful message in the narrative. Although its gameplay is repetitive and doesn't really stand out among the other great games that nailed it already, it does shine a bit for its story and presentation. Is that enough for me to recommend it and call it a good game? Not so much. At its very best, it's just an okay challenge platformer. However, for that $12 launch price tag, I say you're way better off just getting it on a heavy sale or just buying Super Meat Boy instead. For all those reasons and more, I give Rage in Peace a 6.5 out of 10. Thank you all very much for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, then please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing for more videos just like this. You can also find my Twitter, Instagram, and Discord in the description down below. I hope you guys have a great day and keep on gaming.